What's up, everybody? Welcome to Coding with Chaim. In this week's video, we're going to talk about creating a group video chat using Simple Peer and more specifically using webRTC technology. So Simple Peer really is just a sort of wrapper around webRTC, which makes it a lot easier to work with. But really, ultimately, what we're actually doing here is creating a group video chat using webRTC technology. Now, the problem, of course, with WebRTC is that fundamentally it is designed to have one peer-to-peer connection, which means each peer can only really connect to one other peer. So we actually already made a video exploring how that works. If you've missed that video, you can find a link to it down in the description box below. I definitely suggest you watch that before you continue on with this video. It'll be very, very helpful. But the idea basically is that each peer can only really connect to one other peer. So in order for us to actually create what's known as a group chat, what we actually have to do is create something called a mesh network. Now, this is just one of the many solutions that exist to solving the fundamental problem where one peer could only really connect to one peer. But the simplest solution, also the one that doesn't scale that well, but the simplest solution to kind of get you started with actually having a group video chat is in fact known as the mesh network. And basically what that means is for every person that you want to talk to, you have to create a new peer connection. So for example, if let's say you're trying to have a group video chat with 5 people, so that means yourself plus 4 additional people, now you actually have to have 4 peer connections, one for each of the other people that you want to speak to. And what also has to happen is all the other people within your room or within your server that you're actually having a conversation with, and since they're also talking to 4 additional people, each one of them also have to have 4 peers that are created for each of the people that they're trying to talk to. So effectively, each peer at any given point in time is only connected to one other peer, but because everybody's connected to everybody, we actually get a group video chat. So let's actually get into it. If you want to follow along, I have starter files down in the description box below, a link to the GitHub repository. Go ahead and clone that and we can get started. So with all that out of the way, let's actually jump into the code. So the 2 main files that we're going to be working with is pretty much going to be the server.js file, which is where we have our backend code. This is going to be the one, where we have the socket.io code. If you're not familiar with socket.io, actually I have a video down in the description box. You can find a link to a video that I made about that recently. So that'll kind of get you up to speed on socket.io. But if you don't want to watch that right now, that's fine. You don't have to know too much about socket.io to really follow along with this video. What's really more important is the sort of simple peer library and sort of WebRTC technology in general, because that's kind of more the focus of this video. Now, the whole reason why we actually have the socket.io code here is really just to sort of facilitate the handshake, kind of like the signaling that's going to happen between the peers. It in and of itself has nothing to do with the actual communication between one peer and another peer. In other words, the actual video chat that's going to happen will not be happening through the server at all. That all happens in the client-side code via peer-to-peer connection. This, again, is just there for the sort of facilitation of handshakes. So if you don't fully understand how this works and just kind of trust that it does, you'll still at least get the benefit of having the group video chat working with the WebRTC technology. So that's kind of what all the server code does. We're not really going to be focusing on this too much because I kind of left all this code as is in working order. But rather, we're going to be focusing on the room file that's going to be found in the client folder under source routes. There's a file called RoomJS. This is where the actual sort of group video chat code is going to live. This is where we're actually going to create the actual chat screen where all the peers are going to kind of be connected together. Okay, so I have a lot of code up here already, but what I've pretty much done is I've left 3 crucial points out, right? So in other words, here when we're actually connecting to the room, so in other words, when you actually join the room, the use effect runs, and I'm basically treating it as a did mount because I've got the empty dependency array. So in other words, when you actually join the room for the first time, and only then you actually get this use effect to fire. You're basically going to connect to the room. We're going to ask you for your media devices trying to get your audio and your video. And then we have a function called create peer and a function called add peer. So before I actually kind of get into filling in all the code here, let's just briefly talk about the flow that I've basically had in mind for how this is going to work. Basically, what happens is for each person that we're trying to talk to, we basically have to have a new peer created for that individual person, which basically means we need to actually have a collection of peers for all the people that we're talking to. So therefore, what we actually have here is this peers ref, which is really going to be an array of peers. So therefore, we'll actually be able to have a collection of peers. And what we're also going to do is kind of match the individual peer object to a socket ID. So every single person that joins will have a unique socket ID that gets created for them by socket.io. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to basically hold an array of objects in our peers ref array, where basically the object is going to be a sort of a socket ID to an actual peer object. And now what that's going to allow us to do is to actually start creating handshakes with each individual peer as they sort of come and go. And so what's going to happen is when a person actually joins the room, if there are already people within the room, then this person that just joined will basically notify all the people in the room that somebody else has joined. He'll send along his socket ID to all the participants that are already in the room. All those people are going to basically add a new peer to their existing peers ref array, right? And the person that just joined will basically get a list of all the people that are already in the room, right? And get all of their IDs. And what he'll do is he'll basically iterate through that array of peers, and for each one create a new peer, and then sending the signal to that particular person. So this will all make a lot more sense within once we actually get into the code. So let's actually get into that right now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is basically take the stream that we're getting from our own stream and just apply it to our own video component so that we can actually see our own video. And so what we'll do is we're just going to say user video.current. So basically user video is going to be a ref to the actual user video. We're going to call the source object prop, and we're just going to pass it the stream. So now we can actually see our own video. Now we're going to go ahead and reference the socket ref. We're going to basically emit an event saying that we have joined the room. Okay, so now that we've joined the room, now the next thing that's going to happen is the server is going to emit back an event giving us all the users that are currently in this particular chat. So we're going to say socket ref.current.on all users. So we're basically getting all the users. This is going to give us an array of users. And now we're going to create an array of peers right over here, which is going to start out as empty. So again, this is the person that has just joined, right? So this person has no peers yet because they literally just joined, because they're the one actually coming into the use effect, right? So now what's going to happen is we're going to take this users array that we just got from the server, which pretty much is going to have all the users that are already participants within this chat, right? Assuming that they already exist, and we're going to get their user IDs. Now for each one, we're basically going to go ahead and create a peer. So we're going to say const peer equals create peer. Now, of course, this function just exists, but we haven't really filled in the actual logic of the function yet. But what it does is it takes in a user ID of the person that we're trying to, create a peer for. We're going to send in our own ID so that we know who's calling, and they're also going to send in our own stream. Now, this basically returns a newly created peer. So we're going to go ahead and call the peers ref.current push. So this basically is going to be our array of peers, and then what we're pretty much going to do is pass in the peer ID, which pretty much just represents the socket ID of the person who we just created a peer for. So in other words, one of the participants who are in the chat that is not us, we're basically going to be grabbing their peer ID, and we're going to be pushing it into our peers array, which is going to come in very handy soon, and then the actual peer object as well. Now that we actually have the peer object push into the peers ref array, now we also have to take this peer object of itself and pass it into this peers array up here, because we actually are maintaining sort of two arrays of peers. One is the ref, which basically will handle the actual collection of peers, so we know who to signal and who we have signaled and whose stream we're getting and stuff like that. In other words, all the actual simple peer related logic. And then we also have to have an array of peers to pretty much for rendering purposes, because we kind of need to know how many videos we're actually rendering. So that's what this peers array is here. This one's actually going to be our state. So for that, we're just pushing in the peer object itself. We don't need the socket ID for that one. And then we can just go ahead and call our set peers method that we have from set state, or from useState rather, and then pass in our peers. And so again, the logic here pretty much is when a person actually joins the room, they're going to emit an event saying that they joined the room. In return, the server will pretty much send back all the users. So this is going to be an array of users that is everybody in the chat except for themselves. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new peer for each one of these people. For all the people that are in the room, we're going to pass it into our array of peers that we're trying to keep track of, and we're also going to pass it into our state of peers. Therefore, we can actually go ahead and handle the rendering, so we can kind of create a video for each one of these people. Now, let's actually go ahead and fill in the create peer function. So the create peer function pretty much looks like this. What we're going to do is we're going to create a peer object. We go to a new peer. Initiator. In this case, initiator is actually going to be set to true, because basically what happens is the initiator property, the way that it works is if initiator is set to true, then immediately upon construction will the signal get sent out. And so the idea here basically is that since I'm the one that's currently joining the room, I need to tell everyone else in the room that I have just joined. So all the peers that I'm creating have to have initiator set to true. Therefore, I can immediately send out a signal to them using socket.io so that they know that, hey, somebody else joined the room. This is this person's signal. Let me grab the signal and then send back my own signal. Because again, we have to sort of send each other signals in order to actually create that handshake to have that proper peer-to-peer connection. Now we're going to set the trickle property to false. And then we're going to set the stream to be equal to our stream. Okay. Now, so as soon as this actually gets constructed, it basically emits an event called signal, and actually, it actually sends out the signal. So in order for us to capture the signal, we have to listen out for the signal event. Let's go ahead and grab the signal. And now what we're going to do is we're pretty much going to emit the signal down to the server. So we're going to say socket ref.current.emit the name of this event that the server is expecting is called sending signal. And then what we're going to pretty much send is going to be an object that's going to look like this. It's going to be user to signal, which is pretty much the actual user IDs. In other words, as we're looping through this array, we get each one of the IDs of the people that are already in the room. We pass it into create peer. Create peer expects that by the argument name of user to signal. So we're pretty much going to be signaling this individual user. Then we're going to send them our own ID by passing in the caller ID and then the actual signal data. Okay, so this pretty much all handles what happens when a person has actually joined the room from the perspective of the person that currently joined. But now we also need to deal with all the logic of what happens when the person who is already in the room is getting notified that somebody else is joining. So let's actually handle that logic now. So what we're going to say is we're going to reference our socket again. We're going to say socket.ref.current.on. So we're going to actually listen out for an event called user joined, right? And then this is going to get us a payload object, which is going to contain a lot of important information that we're going to need. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is actually go ahead and create a peer. So we're going to say const peer is equal to add peer. So this time we're going to actually call the add peer function as opposed to the create peer function, which as of right now has not been filled in, but we will fill it in very soon. Now we're going to reach into our payload object that we're getting from the server. We're going to send this add peer function the signal, the payload.caller ID so that we know who's the one calling us, and then the stream, which is basically our own stream. Okay. Now, once again, we're pretty much going to have to do the same thing that we did up here. We're basically going to push this new peer into the peers ref array, and we're also going to have to push it into states. Okay, but over here, we're only doing it on the one because we already have an array of peers because we're already a person in this room. So we already have peers for everybody that's already in this. We're now creating a new peer for the newcomer that has just joined this room, right? That's the basic idea. So we're basically going to say peers ref.current push. So the peer ID is equal to payload caller ID, and then the actual peer. Now let's go ahead and actually set the peers. Okay, so once again, what we've done here is we're pretty much creating a new peer. So we have to go fill in the logic for the add peer function. We're taking the newly created peer, passing it to our peers ref array, and we're also adding it to state so that we can actually go ahead and re-render a new video element for the person that pretty much just joined. So again, this logic up here, pretty much handles the event of, it's from the perspective of when the person who actually joined the room, what happens when he himself is joining. So he pretty much gets notified with all the user IDs of the people that are already in the chat, creates a new peer with the initiator set to true for each one of those people. Every one of those newly created peers gets put into the peers ref array. And then on the flip side, all of the people that are already sort of in the room, they pretty much get notified that a new user has joined, and then they get the new user's payload, the new user's caller ID, and then their own stream, and they pretty much create a new peer, and then take this newly created peer and pass it into their already existing array, their already sort of populated array. That's kind of the idea. So that pretty much leaves us now with having to fill up the add peer function. Come down to the add peer function, and what we're going to do is we're going to say const peer is equal to new peer. So we're going to once again call the new peer constructor just like before. The difference is now we're going to say initiator is equal to false. Now we're going to say trickle, once again, is false. And then we're just going to pass it to stream. Okay. Now we're going to call the peer.on signal event. Now in this case, the signal event is not going to get fired upon the creation of the peer because here initiator is set to false. Rather, in this case, the signal event is actually going to get fired when this peer is basically getting a sort of an offer. In other words, when it is being notified that somebody wants to create a connection to it, that's when we're pretty much going to be firing the signal. And the way that we do that is by actually signaling on the incoming signal. So we have this argument that's being passed into us here called incoming signal, which is pretty much the signal that was sent from the person who just joined the room. So person A just joined the room. They pretty much are sending their signal to each of the people that are already in the room. Those people are receiving the signal in the form of this argument called incoming signal, and then they're going to accept that signal, and when that happens, they themselves are in return going to send their signal back out. So we're going to handle that right now. So we're going to say peer.on signal. When I have accepted my the incoming signal, I will pretty much send out my own signal, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take that signal that this peer is now sending back out, and we're going to return it back to the server so we can return it back to the caller. Because again, everyone has to get each other's signal in order for us to have a proper peer-to-peer handshake. So we're going to say returning signal, that's the name of the event. We're going to send the signal, and we're going to send it to the caller ID. So in other words, the very person that called us, that's the person who's going to be getting our signal. Now, finally, let's actually go ahead and accept the incoming signal. So we're going to say peer.signal, that's the actual method that we call, passing in the incoming signal. So the basic flow is like this. When a new person joins, right over here, we're going to call the add peer function, passing in the signal that we're getting from the person who just joined and their caller ID, right? Then we're going to come in here. We're pretty much going to create a new peer with the initiator set to false. Then we're going to take this incoming signal. We're going to call the signal method on it, which basically means I'm sort of accepting the signal. In turn, that's going to cause this peer that on signal method to sort of, or this event to fire. Because again, when a peer whose initiator is set to false, they only signal when they have received a signal from somebody else. So in this case, we're calling the peer that signal on the incoming signal, which then will cause this event to get fired. We're going to grab the signal that we have ourselves now generated. We're then going to send it back to the server, which is then going to send it back to the person who called us. In other words, the person who just joined needs to get our signal in turn. That's what this caller ID here represents. Now we have to actually go and fill in the logic of actually getting that signal back from the person who just sent it back to us. Now we're going to come back here. So this is back in our use effect. So we're going to say socket ref current.on, and the name of this event is going to be receiving return signal, and then we're going to get the payload. So now what needs to happen is we have to actually find the peer who we are receiving the signal from, right? So in other words, we are at this point have already sent out our own signal to multiple different people that are already in the room. Now they're all basically sending back their signals. We have to make sure that we actually are signaling on the correct peer. So we're pretty much going to say const item is equal to peers ref.current.find. Let's go ahead and find the actual signal or the actual peer. So remember, the way that this peers ref is structured is it actually has an array of objects where the object basically has a peer ID and then the actual peer object. So we have to make sure that we're signaling with the correct peer object. And so the way to find that is we're going to basically say p, where p.peer ID is equal to the payload.id. And then once we actually have that correct peer, we can now just go ahead and say item.peer.signal on the payload.signal. And that has pretty much effectively now created a perfect round trip. Okay, so that pretty much does it for all the code, and we're pretty much ready to start testing to see if all of this works. But before we do that, let's just run through all the code one more time now that we've kind of worked on it together and just kind of reiterate what everything does, because it's kind of a lot of back and forth that happens here, and I kind of want to make sure that it's all clear. Also, I did notice that I made two mistakes. One is here I called the set peers inside the for each. You have to move set peers out of the for each. Also in the add peer function, make sure that you're returning a peer as well as you are in the create peer. But in the add peer function, I noticed that I forgot to return the peer. So we have to make sure that we actually go ahead and return that peer so we can actually add it into the array. So again, the basic flow is as follows. When a person actually joins the room, assuming that there are already other people in the room, this person is basically now the initiator. And what I mean by that is when the person joins the room, what's going to happen is they're pretty much going to notify everyone in the room that they have joined. The server in turn is going to send them back an array of all the other participants besides for themselves. In other words, they're going to get an array of all the other user IDs, pretty much their socket IDs that is not themselves. And for each one of those users, they're pretty much going to go ahead and create a new peer. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and call the create peer function. In this case, the create peer function pretty much creates a peer with the initiator set to true. What that allows us to do is to immediately emit the signal that we're pretty much going to be sending back to the other people as soon as the construction of the peer happens. In other words, as soon as we create the new peer, the signal event happens, we listen out for that signal event, we capture the signal, and then we go ahead and we send it down to each individual person within the room. So we kind of do this in a loop because we're creating a peer in a loop for every single person. So each individual person gets an individualized signal sent directly to them, right? Now, on the flip side of that, the person that is already in the room, in other words, the people that are now receiving the signal because someone else joined their chat, they're pretty much going to get notified by the server that someone has in fact joined. So this user joined event is going to get fired. And then what's going to happen is they're going to receive a payload. They're going to call the add peer method. The add peer method in this case is what it's going to do is it's actually going to create a peer where the initiator is set to false. Because in this case, we don't need the signal to be sent out right away as soon as the construction of the peer happens. Rather, first we're going to actually accept the incoming signal, and then when that's going to happen is we're going to then take our own signal, fire it off back to the server, and we're going to pretty much send it back to the person who just sent us the signal. So in other words, we are the person who's currently already in the chat. Someone else is joining our chat. They notified us that they joined. They sent us our signal. We've accepted their signal, and in turn, we've created a new peer to add to our already existing array of peers. And then in turn, we're going to take our signal and send it back to that individual user so we can kind of complete that round trip where we basically have a handshake of each peer accepting the other peer's signal. So back to the person who just joined the room, they're now going to be listening out for the event called received returning signal, or they're getting back the return signal. Now they're going to have to actually dig through their array of peers to make sure that they signal on the correct peer, right? Because in other words, they are now potentially going to be receiving in turn 4 or 5 signals, right? So we have to make sure that we know which one of the peers to use to accept the returning signal. Because if you already signal with a peer that already has an established connection with somebody else with a different peer, you're pretty much going to get an error. Because again, each peer could only maintain the connection, a peer-to-peer connection with one other peer. So we have to pretty much dig through and find the peer that has not yet established a connection. And the way that we do that is, whereas the person who's already in the chat, when they're sending back their signal, not only will they send back their signal, they're also going to be sending back their ID. So now I can use this to find the individual peer of the person who is now signaling back to me. And the fact that they're still signaling back to me means what that indicates to me is that I have not yet accepted their signal. So now I can go ahead and safely grab that peer out of the array and then go ahead and accept their incoming signal, which then in turn completes the sort of round trip. I have sent their signal, I have accepted their signal, they have accepted my signal, and now I actually have a peer-to-peer connection with each individual person that's currently already in the chat. That's pretty much all the code. Let's go ahead and see if this works. So as you can see here, I'm on localhost 3000. I'm on this unique ID, which pretty much just represents the actual room ID. So all the other people that want to join this chat have to go to this exact URL, to this exact room ID. So let's grab this. We're going to open up a new tab, pop that in. And now you can see we actually have 2 of us. Now let's go ahead and grab it again, open up a new tab, and now we have 3. And if I open up it one more time, now you can see we actually have a group chat happening with 4 of myself. And I realize that that's a lot, so I apologize for that. Well, that does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please drop a like, subscribe, and I'll be back next week with another video.